Hello, my name is Emmanuel Echampong, the Faculty Director of the Harvard University Center for African Studies. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion today with Dr. Mampeli Rampeli, the co-president of the Africa Club of Rome and a celebrated social justice and human rights activist. Without further ado, let's jump into our conversation. And we'll have a conversation that will touch three broad areas. First, policy and politics, and then we will go into a personal trajectory, and then we will end with some guidance for the next generation. 50 years ago, the Club of Rome published The Limits to Growth, a path-breaking report that predicted many of the systemic issues the world faces today because of human activities. As co-president of the Club of Rome, you are now trying to address the major challenges that face us now and make sure we are not leaving a bigger mess for the next generation of leaders. First, let's talk about the challenges that face us now, from climate change to economic inequities to resource depletion to the COVID pandemic. What do you see as the single most pressing problem to tackle, Dr. Rampeli?
Thank you very much for having me on your show. I believe that the multiple planetary emergencies that we are facing today, that you enumerated, are reminding us of our failure as a human race to understand our interconnectedness, interdependence, and our being within an intertwined web of life. We are part of nature, not in charge of nature, as some of the fundamental religious groups try to tell us. Mother Nature has millions of years of wisdom to teach us, but we need to pay attention. The most important attention we must pay is to the understanding that there is a single human race, and that within that human race, there is a diversity intended to create beauty, love, and joy. When we celebrate that, we will then understand that what Africa, the mother continent, understood millions of years ago, that human beings are wired to be connected, to be interdependent, and to be nested within a healthy biosphere. And when we understand that, then our behavior will be different. We will no longer talk about competitive advantage, but collaborative advantage. Because every ecosystem you watch, there are different living beings in there, and they survive because they collaborate.
So there's a sense in which the challenges we face emerge from maybe I'll say an erroneous sense of self and community.
Absolutely. We need, as indigenous people all over the world are advising scientists who interview them, including the latest IPCC report of the year 2022, which for the first time recognizes that the root cause of the planetary emergencies that we face and the global inequities that seem difficult to dismantle, the root cause of all of that is colonial conquest, which took away, disrupted the interconnectedness, interdependence of the human family. And the pursuit of greed of the minority at the expense of the majority is exactly what got us to where we are. So for us to start imagining a new future, we need to learn anew how to be human, which means we'll need to embrace our interconnectedness and our interdependence and our being nested in the web of life.
You've talked about finding a new path for economic growth, one that's sustainable and does not exacerbate inequality. How would that look like? And how can we start down that path?
The current global economic model is not sustainable and is not desirable. It is built to generate inequality and inequities so that the first movers in any sector of the economy end up being rentiers. They become the people who extract rents, not just from their fellow human beings, but also from nature. And so that itself is a destructive process. And so when I talk about learning anew how to be human, I'm not just talking about it as a kind of touchy-feely. It is the essence of survival. If you want to survive as a human family, we need to have different relationships, one with the other, and the human race with the life around them. And so the economic model that is being touted, the neo-economic liberal model, is one that assumes that there have to be winners and losers. Whereas those of us who are brought up on the African continent know that you become wealthier by making sure that you participate in the well-being, making sure that there is well-being for all. And then those who are the leaders within that process of generating well-being for all are respected, but they are not the dominant figures that have to be listened to. And even in terms of governance, because one of the other problems is that our global governance architecture is a relic of the Second World War, where the victors of that war decided who gets what territory at whatever the expense, and extraction of natural resources from the so-called imperial realms or holdings became the way to succeed. And that is why the 2022 IPCC report reminds those who are the dominant powers in this global environment that their dominance is in fact the major source of the problem. And so the issue of learning anew how to be human includes being able to develop a consciousness that we are at our best when we are surrounded by people we love and they love us and we respect one another and we support one another to succeed. Just as I said at the beginning, that we are wired to be interconnected. The health and the well-being of each of us depends on the health and well-being of us all. And the economic system, which is supposed to be a reflection of the exchange of goods and services in different communities, has been elevated into a global monster, which is a financialized economic model that only extracts rents. One of my colleagues, who's the vice president of the Club of Rome, speaks of the current global economic system as a feudal system, because it's exactly like the old feudal system where you extract rents because you own X number of properties. And so there is a lot of relearning to do. And I believe that universities, as part of the education system, as part of the training system, have to go back to look at how do you continue to teach Economics 101 when you now know this? Because Economics 101 teaches our children exactly the role model of economics that has led us to where we are with all these emergencies, climate, biodiversity, depletions, and of course, the wars and conflicts that we have arise out of greed, where me, myself, and I is more important than we are a family. And in a family, we all watch for one another's back.
Yes. It is interesting that in the 1970s, the developing world, or what was then also sometimes called the third world, sought to redress some of the inequities you talk about through a movement called the New International Economic Order. It did not succeed, but as you refer to some of the current developments unfolding, the wars around us, we see the one on Ukraine and other things, do you think we find ourselves at a particular point in human history where the developed world would be more attentive to these requests to revisit the global international order and to make it more equitable?
I don't believe that we should rely on the so-called developed world, because that's also part of what we are challenging now at the Club of Rome. The language matters. If you are saying there is a developed world and a developing world, are you suggesting that South Africa has to be aspiring to be like the US? I would hope not. Or aspiring to be like Europe? I would hope not. What we need is what we call new narratives, new ways of framing what we mean by certain things. So we at the Club of Rome have got 5 main themes. The first theme being, yes, the world is on fire, so we have to have emergency planetary action taken, including issues like fossil fuels and so on. Second, we need to reframe economics as we know it today, back to the mutual exchange of goods and services in a way that is sustainable. Third, we need to rethink finance. Finance has become the tail that wags the dog. That's why economics is now thought of in terms of the share price, the market. That can't be that what was supposed to be a tool of exchange, which is finance, has now become the marker of success or failure. The fourth area we are focusing on, and this is the key because it is projecting into what kind of future we want. We are proposing that this learning anew how to be human has to re-explore what should an appropriate new civilization, set of civilizations look like in the 21st century onwards. Because the current civilizations that are supposed to be advanced are not actually as advanced as they should be, because you can't advance when you're destroying your whole life-giving resource base. And so we believe there are other ways. And part of those other ways is that we need to relearn what our ancestors learned a long time ago, that you need to live in harmony with the other living beings in this web of life. The final area that we are focusing on is the issue of youth engagement. I come from a continent with a median age of 20, and yet the median age of the African leader is over 60. Now, this is a mismatch. It's a tragedy because Africa has got the gift of a young, creative, energetic youth population that is completely marginalized from the governance system, from the economic system, and instead they are seen as a problem. And that's why we've had the tragedies of young people crossing the Atlantic and drowning, because their home bases are not welcoming them, are not seeing them as the wonderful resources that they are. So there is a whole lot of rethinking that needs to happen. And we don't say as the Global Room that we have the answers. No. What we are very good at, and we can be proud of doing that, is that we understand how living systems change. And therefore, we ask the tough, difficult questions, including questions of what language are we using? The idea of a third world, what does that mean? It's a reflection of white supremacy. White male supremacy is part of the problem that needs to be dismantled, particularly by those who are the holders of power, because the power they hold is poisonous power. There is power that is life-giving, which is the power to enable others. The power to dominate others is not life-giving, and it is toxic even to the holder of that power.
Thank you. Talking about our youthful population takes me to my next question. In Africa, we talk about how by 2050 we will double our population from about 1.2 billion to about 2.5 billion. And depending on your perspective, either you are excited that our numbers are growing, or you are worried because you play side by side population growth with economic growth, and you get concerned that they are not moving in ways that are reinforcing. Is it critical to control population growth to reach a more sustainable future? Or can we do it even if we continue on the current trajectory of the population topping globally 10 billion by the turn of the century?
I would like to start with the issue of population growth is often a reflection of the powerlessness of women in making decisions about how many children they want to have, how they space those children. Women who are educated and have the power to make their own choices automatically, without you and I intervening, decide on smaller families. And I can track that in my own family. I can track it in South Africa. The Afrikaners, when they were the poor whites, they had up to 10, 15 children, their mothers did, but they had fewer children, and their children now, some of them choose not to have children. So I believe that this whole question of controlling population is the wrong question. The right question is, how do we create a socio-economic model that enables everybody, including women, to make the choices that make sense, not just for themselves personally, but for future generations. In addition, this issue of looking to Africa as the problem that's generating population growth that's going to undermine global prosperity is the wrong question. Look at the consumption patterns. One American consumes something like 40 times what an African peasant consumes. So where's the problem in terms of the planetary emergencies we face? It's not the poor peasant. The problem is the overconsumption in the dominant countries like the United States, Europe, etc. And unless those overconsumption patterns are changed, it doesn't matter how small or big the African population is in the long term. Because we have seen, for example, the Chinese people, whether you agree or disagree with their one-child policy, decided that. But they made the decision. We also need to be looking at under what circumstances are countries, and particularly are women, making decisions about the number of children they want to have. And also we know, and I speak now as a medical doctor, that when I worked in poor communities, as the children stopped dying because of preventable infant deaths, women had fewer and fewer children because they knew they would survive. Whereas when I arrived first in a rural village in the northern part of Limpopo, women used to have 6, 8 children, knowing that half of them would die. So the issue is not how many children are born. The issue is there global equity, which ensures well-being for all? Because within that model, fewer children will be born to women who would be empowered to look after them, and within nations and communities that have proper education and healthcare services that make everybody understand the logic of having a family that you can afford to nurture, look after, and where everybody will have enough.
Thank you. Your answers seem to take us naturally to our next points. And so I wanted to ask, in many societies around the world, women and girls have been left behind or pushed backward. How do we change the culture in those societies to give women and girls a fair chance?
Again, that is an illustration of how toxic dominance works. In my country, for example, we have a 1996 constitution which proclaims gender equality, which is supposed to which has set the frame for equality of all beings. But we've never had more gender-based violence as we have in South Africa today. We've never had so many women dying at the hands of their loved ones, the partners or husbands, etc. And children are more at risk of abuse today than ever before. And why is that? That is going back to a question that you alluded to at the beginning of this conversation, that my country, despite its beautiful constitution, did not do the work that every community, every nation, and the global community needs to do, the work of shifting mindsets. Because we have grown up with this toxic masculinity, with toxic dominance of white males, who in turn have humiliated Black men wherever they are, whether it's African Americans who were dragged as slaves to America and treated like property. You leave scars that neuroscientists tell us they are multi-generational, and unless you actually sit down and have a process of acknowledging that, yes, I am wounded as Patrick or Mampela or Madume, and therefore let us talk about it. And that is what we did as the generation of young South African activists in the late 60s. We used to call ourselves non-Europeans, non-whites. Really? In Africa, you call yourself that? Imagine if Americans were to say, we are non-Europeans. People would think they are crazy. And yes, we were crazy. But it is recognizing the craziness of accepting being dominated by somebody else, accepting somebody else as the standard by which you measure yourself. That is what perpetuates inequities and inequalities. So we came to liberate ourselves, and the Black consciousness movement of South Africa is the movement that reawakened South Africans, both those who were in exile and those who were at home or in prison, to say to them what now we know, and in fact, Frantz Fanon is the guy, the psychiatrist from Algeria, who helped us to understand through his writings that for as long as you define yourself in terms of other people, you are never going to be free. So we liberated ourselves as early as 1969. And once you are free from seeing yourself through other people's eyes, whether as a Black person or as a woman, then no one can imprison you. We owe to the Black consciousness the Soweto uprisings of the 70s, not because we as a small group of activists got those young people to revolt. No, once they found their power, the power within them, they revolted against an education system that was intended to keep them as hewers of wood and drawers of water. And unfortunately, the combination of the brutality of the apartheid regime and the fear of loss of power by the ANC in exile, there was a systematic undermining of the Black consciousness movement. So what we see today in South Africa are people in government who are not yet conscious of the power of liberating themselves from measuring themselves against what will Washington consensus people say. It's not important. What's important is, what do you say? What kind of socioeconomic system is suitable for South Africa, not one set up by the Washington consensus. And so South Africa is not a poor country, but it has impoverished the majority of people by continuing the socio-economic model it inherited from apartheid. And that will not change by changing who is a president. It will change by going back to finding out from ourselves as South Africans, starting particularly with young people, which is why my job, because I'm now 74, I don't have the energy to run around being an activist, but I do have the energy and some wisdom from the mistakes I've made, the successes I've had, to enjoy and to promote, to support young people. And they are getting up. They are realizing that they are the leaders they've been waiting for. It's not somebody who's coming to liberate you. You have to liberate yourself first. And then you become a catalyst for the liberation of your your peers, and your parents, your younger brothers and sisters. And that's how freedom happens. It is not something that we impose from outside, but it starts from liberating the inner person in each and every one of us. And then we show up with our best values, those that our ancestors have passed on to us. Ubuntu, the I am because you are, the interconnectedness, the interdependence of the entire human race. So we must banish this idea of racism. There is no such thing. There is one race, the human race.
The human race. Thank you. So since we have to at least talk about South Africa a little bit, since you're from South Africa and I am married to a South African, so we cannot leave out South Africa. So let's look to the post-1994 transition. And you've written a book on dreams, betrayal, and hope. There's a sense in which post-1994, there was this enormous fount of goodwill in this transition for nationally, in terms of the continent, internationally. Has this goodwill been squandered? If you were to sort of look back at this transition post-1994, what would be some of the reflections briefly that you share? I know this is a huge subject, but some reflections would be valued.
I'm not sure that I would frame it as goodwill being squandered. I would frame it as a dream betrayed. All South Africans were bushy-tailed, excited about the prospect of finally seeing their country being one characterized by equity, well-being for all, and equality where it really matters. Now, the problem has been the nature of the transition from apartheid to the constitutional democratic order we had. The problem was in the negotiating team under Mandela, assuming that they can negotiate a political settlement and then postpone the settlement of the socio-economic transformation that's needed to post-apartheid, that they in government will be able to dismantle the very deeply embedded neoliberal extractive economic system that they inherited. And also, there was a complication which Mandela recognized very early on, because I used to visit him when he was in Victor Verster after they released him from Robben Island. He stayed there for a couple of years. And he was acutely aware of the fact that, as he put it, we are coming back to a country we no longer know. We therefore need advice from people like you and others who have been in the struggle for freedom inside South Africa. I duly asked my colleagues and people who are willing to support the negotiation process as a panel of advisors, whether it's matters of economics, matters of finance, matters of social development. But Thabo Mbeki, who was the leader of the ANC that came back from exile, saw that as a threat to their intentions of command and control. So he said to Mandela, no, we've got our own people. Of course, their own people, many of them were in exile, many of them were international advisors. They didn't understand the intricacies of the South African system. And so what happened is that they negotiated a good political settlement as reflected by the Constitution, but they left intact an extractive socio-economic system. And so you come to South Africa today, 28 years after the end of apartheid. The apartheid geography is still in place. The apartheid education is still in place. Health, you name it, is still there. And of course, you have all heard about state capture, which is a process refined by colonial conquest. Colonial conquest was nothing but state capture. They captured countries, territories, and extracted the goods and services from those countries for the mother or the imperial capital. Now, the problem is that most post-colonial South Africa, post-colonial Africa, and in fact, even Latin America, have been trapped by trying to govern with the socio-economic models they inherited from the departing colonialists. It doesn't work. And so what South Africa tried to do was to introduce Black economic empowerment. It's laughable. Can you imagine the Chinese having Chinese economic empowerment? It's not a question of empowering a few people. It's a structure. We needed to dismantle the structures that made sure that the first movers would always win. So we didn't do enough in terms of restoring the land to its owners. We didn't do enough in terms of making sure every child got the highest possible quality of education, health, and rich environments within which to grow. So South Africa is a poster child of what I was talking about in terms of global equity. If we want equity, prosperity in South Africa, we will have to dismantle the socio-economic system that generates poverty, inequality, and the violence that is embedded in such a marginalizing socioeconomic system. And so don't just look at the superficial high crime, high gender-based violence. Let's go to the root causes. And when we do that, we will be much more successful, both at the level of my country, but also my continent, but also the globe.
Thank you. We are going to move to a conclusion. Just a couple of more sort of shorter questions as we end. You've been an activist for peace, racial justice, and sustainable economic equity for decades. Where do you find the inspiration to continue doing what you do? Do you ever feel hopeless? How do you motivate yourself to keep going? And what sort of key lessons about leadership have you learned in this process?
The first lesson is that you have to liberate yourself from the sense of inferiority imposed by others because you are Black, you're a woman. You've got to liberate yourself from fear of the unknown, fear of failure. And you've got to trust that each one of us is here for a purpose. The creation process has created us very uniquely, each one of us. Even though we are interconnected, interdependent, you have a role in this biosphere that only you can fulfill. And you've got to keep on keeping on. Mm. The other thing, of course, is that as a woman, as a mother, as an activist who lost so many people in the struggle for freedom, I cannot betray the pact that we had as freedom fighters, that we are either going to die fighting for freedom or else live to see it. Now, I have lived to see the beginnings of it, but it's not yet Uhuru. So I keep on. But finally, I keep on because I'm a mother of 2 sons. I'm a grandmother of beautiful 2 children. I don't want them to grow up in a South Africa that continues to miss the opportunity to claim its greatness. An Africa that has missed its opportunity to be the great mother continent, the great cradle of human civilization that it is. I want to be able to go to my ancestors, having done everything I can do to support the next generation to come up, to lead with next generations in mind. That's my mission. And that mission is not yet accomplished.
Talking about next generations, we are now in the season of graduations for high schools and colleges. What is your top message to the young people of today?
My message to young people of today is that they are the generation that's had the best opportunities for education and training than any other generation. They are the generation living in a visibly connected, interconnected, and interdependent world. But they are also the generation that sees the failures and the cost of those failures, COVID, planetary, climate change, they therefore have both the tools, but the vested interests of making sure their children grow up with a planet that can sustain humanity for more 100 years to come. They therefore have to find their mission. Like we were urged by Frantz Fanon to find our mission, they must find their mission and they must live it. And it's not a question of, I do this at work and then I'm a family man. The personal, the professional, and the political are intertwined by it. The same value system that drives you to do the best for your family should be the same value system that drives you to do the best as a public servant or a professional. And it should be the same value system that drives you in your leadership position, whether in the private sector or the public sector. So they have the opportunity to be the best generation that ever was. And I wish them everything of the best, but they must step up.
Thank you, Dr. Ramphele, for your time and for your insights on solving big issues related to sustainability and inequality today, as well as racial and economic disparities. I wish you well as you continue your important work. Thank you as well to our viewers. Please stay tuned for more from the Harvard Chan Studio. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.